Today, let's take a look at two different spellcasters, the Mage and the Lich, and see how their different complexities create interesting tactics, all changed in the 2024 Monster Manual. Here we go. In my reviews of the Monster Manual, I've been talking about how there are these choices, tactical choices that various monsters present. Like, should I use my multi-attack, or should I use some AoE once per encounter spell or other ability I have? Should I use my legendary action, something that's very tactical in nature, or something that just deals damage? These are tough choices that the more that you're a new DM, the more you may struggle with. I want to kind of look at those in this video, as well as some other topics. But let's dive right into the Mage. The Mage is a CR6 spellcaster. It was a big deal in 2014 as sort of one of the few options we really had for a good old, this is a spellcaster that's human or humanoid in some way, and it's just going to drop some spells on you. But it had some issues. It had some vulnerabilities that made it easy to take out, and it sort of struggled with how it could set itself up tactically to get the most out of its damage. So something that could happen with a Mage is it might really deal a ton of damage, or it might just be killed outright before it could even get to act. And so that is still, but less of a concern, and we're going to talk about that. So for the lore of the Mage, we don't have a whole lot. We get some nice art of some red Than wizards and some sort of arcane enclave doing some sort of ritual. Some of the people in the back look like they're very surprised by what's happening, very much like the D&D movie. So maybe these guys are actually doing something that will endanger some of the students, who knows. Mages are magical wonder workers ranging from spellcasting overlords to reclusive witches. So this stat block, or these stat blocks, carry a lot of weight. They study mystical secrets and possess insight into monsters, legends, omens, and other lore. They hire assistants and so on, and we can roll to get some inspiration on the types of mages. An author who writes about the occult, a magical engineer who creates wonders, a soothsayer who advises rulers. Okay, yeah, that's fine, but you probably already have the idea of what your mage is. What you're probably looking for is something that's magical and really packs a punch. And we get three types of mages. The Mage Apprentice is a younger mage. This is a CR2 version, so that's nice to have that. Works really nicely to have like a lower level mage that we can drop into encounters. That mage has Thunder Wave, in addition to an arcane burst attack it can do, and a few other options. But the kind of big deal it has is being able to cast Thunder Wave once. That may feel kind of underwhelming, but again, I don't want to focus on this guy. Let's get to the Mage. And we will, after I mention the fact that there is an Archmage, and the Archmage is much stronger at CR12 and has more options. A lot of the concepts of the Mage actually will work for the Archmage. It just has a few other options it can do. Surprisingly, not as many as you'd think, which maybe is good because it keeps that complexity down. And one of the nice things about the Mage itself, here at CR6, is it keeps things actually low complexity, given that you have to deal with spells. So let's look first at the top lines of the stat block, kind of above the abilities and above. And here we've got an AC of 15. We've got an initiative of +2, 81 hit points. What does that mean, you might ask? Well, this is an average AC and save DCs that it has. So a lot like other monsters, the Mage will perform that way with its AC and its save DCs based on other CR6 monsters. It is below average on hit points. The average would be 109 hit points for this CR for 2024 monsters, and it has only 81, so it's a little vulnerable in terms of being taken out of the fight quickly, though it's better than it used to be. Its initiative is actually a little bit lower. A lot of the spellcasters got bumps. This is 2 instead of the average of 3.6, so it's not an incredible initiative. I would actually consider bumping that up in my encounters, because I think spellcasters, really brilliant kind of minds, they should get to act quickly to kind of reflect the fact that they probably saw this coming. The attack bonus is +6 versus a +7, but you're not going to make a ton of attack rolls, so it's okay that it's just 1 lower than the average. And overall, we have a simple stat block where we don't have traits or immunities. We do have some bonus actions and reactions, but those are pretty reasonable. And if we look at the ability scores, you can see that here we have an above average intelligence, right? 17. It's got a decent dex, and then the wisdom is positive with a 12, but the rest is con and charisma of 11 and a strength of 9. So it's not incredible in terms of its ability scores compared to other monsters. Strong in arcana and history, and it's okay in perception. Its gear is listed as having a wand. It's really bizarre what they did in 2024 with gear. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. It has a wand in its hand. Great, I guess. The one thing I do like here is if we look at the languages, here we have common plus 3 other languages. And something that can be fun to do an encounter. And when I see this, this is all about kind of how I interpret a stat block, I hope, this video for you, and helpful to make you think of new ways to view stat blocks. When I see this, I think, okay, well, what are the other 3 languages? I get to choose them. It could represent the mage, but it's even more fun if these are languages that one of the characters can speak and the rest of the characters don't. And that can be a tool I can use for role-playing, for villainous plans, for things like that. Like maybe once I get to half hit points bloodied, my mage might reach out to to the rogue in a language only the rogue speaks and say, hey, I'll make a deal with you. I know something that you really want to know, that thing related to the mission or the backstory or whatever, let me convince the others to let me escape and I'll give you that information, or the special magic item you're looking for, or whatever, right? It could be really interesting to do that, and having that language allows you to do a kind of play like that can be pretty cool. It also means it could be a language that only its buddies understand, and so if it's served by a number of henchmen, it can give them instructions the rest of the party can't figure out unless they use a spell or something like that, and that can be rewarding and fun too. So that's kind of the setup. As I said, pretty simple up top, which is nice. I like that. And now we're going to get into the complexity. So let's talk about the actions, and let's start with what the average DPR is, because one of the important things that a stat block does is challenge the party, right? Press them, give them reasons to be heroes. And if it's a flop, well, it's a lot harder to do that. So I want to assess how hard this can hit. And well, good news. The mage can hit really hard. The average damage per round, in a situation where we say that a spell or effect can only hit a maximum of 2 targets, that average damage per round is 66. And that is much stronger than the CR6 average of 47. If we allow for the size of the AoE to target more than 2 targets to a number that I think is a little more reasonable, that damage balloons upwards from that 66 to 132. That is much higher than the average of 51 for multi-target damage for all the other CR6 monsters, if I average those out. In case you're curious, for 2-target calculations, the strongest is the Kuo-toa Archpriest out of all the CR6s. It can do 87 damage compared to that 66 of the Mage. The highest multi-target, if we assume you can hit more than just that cap of 2 targets in spells and AoE effects, well, the Mage is the top, as I said, with that 132. That's amazing. Then the Kuo-toa Archpriest, and then the Azer Pyromancer. Actually, the Kuo-toa and the Archpriest and the Azer Pyromancer are a tie. What's the point of all this? Life is not just damage, not at all. But this tells us that you can really pour on the damage if you can get the whole party in your area of effect. And that's important to know. We don't want to TPK our party, but we also don't want to be a cakewalk if this mage is supposed to represent, as it probably does, a really important foe, maybe a villain, right? So we want to know that there is a possible path to achieving some beautiful DPR here. That's great. I love it. And what is that path to DPR? Well, you might see the first thing that comes up here, which is this multi-attack it has, which is an arcane burst. That arcane burst is cool. Like, it's neat that you can make these 3 attacks and you can do it melee, or it can be a big range out there and you're hitting for 16 force damage. That's excellent. But that's 48 points of damage. Not bad. Again, the average DPR at this CR, if we talk about even multi-targets, is 51. So that is actually a strong hitting multi-attack. It's not bad at all. And so if you want to tone it down, hey, just Arcane Burst away, because that's pretty effective and will not be laughable. It'll be strong. But let's talk about what it can do instead in the path towards a really hard-hitting DPR if your party deserves it. Like, they are really strong and need a challenge. A Cone of Cold does 8 dice of an average of 4.5 damage per die. So that is going to be, if you can get 4 targets in that big cone of cold, 144 points of damage you dish out in that round. Now, you might be that you get 3 targets in there, and so that would be 3 times 8 times 4.5. It's still a bunch, and it is still significant even with 2 targets, right? 9 times 8, 72. So it's not bad, right? It's really strong to use Cone of Cold, but it's especially strong if you can get 4 of those party members, which should be possible with the right setup. You can drop a hammer on them. And most of us who've run a lot of D&D have seen some point when the mage dropped that Cone of Cold and the party just goes, oh, wow. And that can be a lot of fun and heroic. Just, kid gloves if your party isn't super, super strong. All right, so that is the first thing. That right there, Cone of Cold, if you can get the 4 targets in there, that is amazing. 144 damage is no joke. You can follow it up with the fact that you can do a level 4 fireball twice. So you can do 9 times 3.5 average on the die times 4 twice. That's 126 damage twice. That is substantial. Now, yes, probably the party will scatter and get out of the way. But even if you're hitting 2 characters in that fireball, it's still a good amount of damage, right? In fact, if we just look at 2 target damage, the Cone of Cold will deal 72. The fireball will do 63. Those are still better than your Arcane Burst dealing 48, right? So spellcasting is the way to go for the path to damage. How far you want to milk it depends on your tactical setup, your encounter setup, how much you're forcing a bottleneck or creating the possibility towards one. And that is just really, really substantial. This level of damage also allows you to do some pretty fun things, like throw in some minions that are really quite weak, but that concentrate the party and murderize all those minions with this AoE. So they actually aren't part of the challenge, but they help to bottle everybody together, and you just blow them away to show how ruthless this mage is. That's a fun move. Okay, so that's the path to optimum mage damage. We can also look at some other things that you can do that are pretty fun. For example, invisibility is a great pre-combat move. You cast that spell, it's a concentration spell, and now you can put yourself at the beginning of combat wherever you want to maximize that fireball or Cone of Cold. Just for that, if you need strong damage, then you can do this to just make sure you get that off, because the party won't see this threat. They'll probably stay in their normal movement formation, and you just drop that hammer on them. It's also great because by starting with invisibility, it can't be targeted by most PCs, which will allow it to survive what often happens at the very beginning of combat, where they see what looks like a spellcaster and the characters just target everything on that one caster. You can simply do this just by standing out of cover. There's no reason you have to be out in the open as a mage, but invisibility just gives you that assuredness that you will not be seen by most of the characters no matter what they're doing, and you can move around fairly well to do that. I'm not going to get into the 2024 hiding rules. That's for another time, but at a concept level, let's say this works. Another fun spell that you have here as a utility option is Fly. And Fly can really help you get into position, though we have to keep in mind that if you do something else that would end concentration, or if something ends your concentration, you might fall. It can actually be really cool, right? Let the characters end its concentration and drop it can be really rewarding. That can be fun. Watch the mage fall, 20 feet and take some damage from that. Nothing wrong with doing that. Just think through whether your mage should want to do that, given the level, what you're trying to do here with fun and how good your characters are. But Fly is a great way to maneuver quickly into position, get that Cone of Cold off or another fireball off when it seems like the caster could not do so. Fly can also help you get out of the encounter, right? Up to the top door that nobody can easily get to otherwise, and it'll take them 3 rounds to get to. So if your mage needs to escape, Fly can be the way to do that. It's important to note you can't fly and be invisible because they're both concentration spells, but you can also do things like use Misty Step to get to where you would be behind cover. Now you cast invisibility, and nobody saw you cast invisibility. They might have heard some spell casting, but you now vanish, right? Did you dimension door? Did you plane shift, nobody knows. Similarly, you could misty step somewhere, fly the next round, and then come out and surprise everybody when they gather. So all these spells, there aren't that many, but they create actually some fun abilities to maneuver and get around. And the way I'd probably look at this is if my encounter setup does not require that I use invisibility ahead of time, then I keep that in my back pocket as a way to respond to character changes. Fly also goes in that category of respond to character changes, use it when I need it, and I'm trying to get everybody into that AoE for maximum damage. And if I don't, hey, Arcane Burst is totally fine. But I do keep in mind that I have fewer hit points, and so I've got to be a little defensive in this approach. Misty Step, bonus action, great get out of jail free card. The other thing here we have is the reaction of Protective Magic. 3 times per day we can cast Counterspell or Shield. So this is really nice to counterspell the counterspell, to raise a shield to protect from force damage or that hit that would otherwise miss us. That can be really nice to do that. It's very important that we get our spells off if we need to get that damage out as part of the challenge here. And again, you've got that wand, so yeah, your gear. Okay. We can compare to the 2014 Mage and see if we lost anything. And by and large, everything is really very similar, other than, as I mentioned, that big bump to hit points, right? It used to have 40 hit points. So this CR6 used to go down so quickly under a barrage of attacks from all manner of creatures that saw it. Double its hit points should mean it should be able to get past level 1, but especially if, as we talked about, you start behind cover, you know you're being protective and careful, then you probably won't run out of those hit points so quickly. The other big change is to its spell casting. Here we got rid of the Firebolt, and a little bit like what Mordenkainen has tried to do to the game. That book really brought in the idea of Mordenkaine's Multiverse, I should say. That Multiverse book really brought in the idea that, hey, if it's a cantrip that we're doing all the time, let's not look it up. Let's just make it this, arcane bolt that fires off. We also got rid of spells like Magic Missile. We moved Shield into being a reaction. And Misty Step became just a bonus action spell. But we did lose Greater Invisibility, getting invisibility instead. And that's a bit too bad, because when you gave a mage Greater Invisibility, they were absolutely brutal to be able to launch these spells off without being seen. It also lost Ice Storm, but it's okay. It is still very strong in its current form. Getting those hit points more than makes up for it. It just means you got to be a little careful about how you move around with that invisibility. Maybe it's a little more of a cat and mouse. I don't know that you really have the hit points for cat and mousing around with invisibility, but if you are that evil mage that is going to go down with a fight, then that invisibility can work that way, right? You drop a cone of cold, you duck behind cover, people start coming towards you, cast invisibility, move into another place, drop a fireball, and now maybe you run away and do it again, or maybe you just start battling away, drop that second fireball as everybody comes towards you thinking you can't possibly have another fireball, right? And then at that point you're spent and it's time to die. Yeah, that could work. Arcane Burst from there on out if you're still alive. That's an option. So I hope you enjoyed looking at the Mage. Let's look at the Lich. Thinking about the Lich is really different than thinking about the Mage. Like, the Mage can be a minor villain, but when we say Lich, we are thinking major villain, right? This is an important creature in lore, in the myth of D&D. We want it to really, really kick. We want it to be strong. We want it to be flavorful. Where the Mage could be really simple, now we need a few more complexities because we're dealing with an undead creature. Let's take a look what it has. So we get some nice new art of the 2024 Lich. We're told it's a deathless master of magic. Nice way to abbreviate it. And we are told a little bit about how some magic users will make this necromantic ritual that will sever their souls from their bodies, and the cunning they have. They tend to have uncanny agendas. They tie into greater things like the secrets of life, the multiverse, godhood. The age and origin influences its form. That's kind of a nice touch, right? Whether it's a brittle skeleton or it mostly looks living because it's fairly new. The illusions that they might cloak themselves in. And that over time they can become demi-liches. Pretty good. And we get a little fun quote from Rudolf van Richten. We now have the spirit jar is the name for the vessel where their spirit is put into. And this is really a critical part of the Lich, in that the Lich cannot normally be destroyed. You can defeat it now, but it's going to reform into this spirit jar. And that means that this encounter doesn't have to be the last with the Lich, or that you can face something that is maybe key to your campaign, but you're not ending that threat because off they go. Now, they may still, when they reform, stay away from the characters. That doesn't mean the battle has to go on. It can be a one-shot, because honestly, you defeated me once, maybe I don't want to take you on a second time, right? I got other things to do, or I'm licking my wounds. So it can just be once. But it's that interesting part of knowing that you have not truly defeated this foe, even if you've kept them away from whatever their immediate interests were. And we got a table of 8 things that the spirit jar might be. It's a bottle or puzzle box inscribed with sigils. It's a hollow figurine of a deity. It's a rune-etched egg. Ideas like that, to think about the idea that, hey, make that container interesting. In fact, weave it into the story of what it might be, right? Lich Lairs were given a little bit of concepts that were on that might be. This is a high CR creature, so we're talking about something that its lair should probably be kind of fantastical or interesting in some way, right? A fortress with a cursed reputation, extraplanar bastion, extraplanar even bastion. And we are told that the region containing the Lich's lair is warped by its presence. And this gives us 2 lair kind of, not actions, but lair qualities. And these effects are honestly kind of a step back from what we saw in previous books that had lair actions and lair effects that were kind of bigger and really interesting. So what we get now is all-seeing. In its lair, the Lich can cast the clairvoyance spell, so it can just see you coming. That's cool. We'll see later it has scry as well, but here this clairvoyance means you can just always watch people moving around your lair. Fair, that's good. Represents the Lich's intelligence, something to keep in mind if we're in lair. The other is inevitable siphon. When a humanoid dies within 1 mile, the soul is consumed by the Lich. So if you die, only a true resurrection or wish spell can bring you back. This is the kind of thing that you want to establish ahead of time. There's finding out this kind of when you walk in some way, that can achieve some dread. And so there are times you may want to surprise folks, but you may want to say this up front as part of the truly wretched reputation of this creature, and why people fear going in here is because only the strongest can hope to survive this Lich, and that death is death for most creatures walking in here. You're not just going to be brought back with something, some quick spell. It's going to take major magic to bring you back, and it won't be during combat when you're dead. This matters, especially when it has a spell that can kill you. And it may have traps and other things, other creatures you're going to face first, so it makes it even more fearsome. And it just says if it's destroyed or moves its lair elsewhere, these effects end immediately. That is interesting in that if you defeat it, then before it gets to regain its new body, that whole limit on true resurrection and wish will go away. So defeat the Lich, you can now use any kind of spell to bring people back to life. That's kind of interesting. That could be neat lore to have somebody figure out before the battle. All right, so let's take a look at the stat block. So let's take a look at the stat block, and this is a CR21 creature. We're going to see a lot more complexity. We're going to see 2 traits, 4 actions, one of which is spellcasting with many other options, 1 reaction, 3 legendary actions, and it gets to do 4 total. And for spellcasting, we're going to get an impressive 15 spells. How many rounds will this fight last? Do we need all those options? Not sure, but we get them. So let's take a look at the top part of its spell block. Here we have on average AC. Its initiative is actually on average, even though it's an incredible plus 17. A lot of these legendary creatures got, if you may have heard me talking about on the Mastering Dungeons podcast, higher initiative, higher damage output. This is for sure the case here. The Lich has below average hit points, but not a ton less. It has 315 hit points. The average for its CR is 336. The attack bonus is plus 12, which is lower than the 14 per 2 average, but not super critical given how it operates. We'll see that. And its save DC is 20 versus the average of 22. Kind of surprising that but I think it just probably reflects what other monsters are like. 20 is still pretty reasonable. It's hard depending on what the abilities are of the characters. In terms of its own abilities, it's got a really high int, strong 16 in both Dex, Charisma, and Constitution, and then has 14 Wisdom and average Strength. It has resistances and immunities. And you can see these are like you might expect: cold, lightning, necrotic, poison, charmed, exhaustion, frightened, paralyzed, poison. So those are important to note, right? I mean, write out that you're going to be immune to necrotic, immune to poison. Those are pretty common for undead types. Resistant to cold and lightning. But it's this idea that you're going to be immune to the conditions of charmed, exhaustion, frightened, paralyzed, and poison. That's important. Paralysis and charm especially, something somebody might forget and try to slip in past you. So good to make a note of those. Maybe you want to, write them out and put them on the DM screen facing you, or highlight them on the stat block if you are printing it out. It has gear again, component pouch. So, yeah, I don't know what the point of that is. But what does matter are the senses. So this has true sight of 120 feet. That's really important because it can see somebody who's invisible. It is going to see through illusions. So, you've got that glamour bard that's doing all kinds of things, or whatever, any spellcaster is doing, weaving illusions and things like that. It's going to see through those sort of illusions that are meant to conceal, obscure, or whatever. That's really important. It has a high passive perception because it has a reasonable +9 perception. So it also, on top of that true sight that can just see through somebody who's invisible, it also has the ability to hear somebody who's hiding, or spot somebody who's trying to duck down behind a corner and hide and things like that. Fun thing, languages all. We talked about this with the Mage. Here it has all languages, so it can choose to speak to anybody in a particular language. That's kind of a neat idea. I like that. We look at the traits. We've got legendary resistance, 4 times per day or 5 per day in Lair, and that's a high number compared to a lot of monsters. So a Lich is the kind of creature that often will be in its lair, so 5 legendary resistance where it can choose after it failed on a saving throw to succeed is really good. With a creature like a Lich, this is something where I think it's really important to allow opportunities for players to talk it into choosing when to use a legendary resistance, right? I gave an example recently where my bard was fighting a god. And in this adventure, the god was really proving how powerful it was. So I used a level 1 command spell on it that I could do as a bonus action with my bard. The god failed that save. All this would do would make it grovel, which honestly couldn't have cared about tactically much. But in talking to the DM agreed that, there's no way this god is going to grovel before me. So it used up its last legendary resistance on avoiding that command spell, right? And that kind of role-playing can be really cool in encounters. So think about that legendary resistance. You got a lot of them, but maybe the players can sucker you into one and you're actually rooting for them, and so it's awesome. The other trait that's here is the Spirit Jar, where if destroyed, the Lich is going to reform in 1d10 days. It'll be back to normal, and it's going to appear, it says within the Lich's lair, but I think what they mean is where it has the Spirit Jar secured, because otherwise the characters would just camp out there and kill it again. But the important thing here is wherever that Spirit Jar is, that's where the Lich is going to go to, which will probably not be where they face it unless you really want it to be, because that would totally end the point of this. But normally, as we discussed, it's going to go off somewhere else, and it could come back as a threat, maybe later, maybe soon, depends on the story. As we talked about with the Mage, we're going to look at the DPR of the Lich because this matters. Our Lich is a creature that's usually meant to be a big, thrilling fight. This might be campaign ending, or it's a super prominent Lich. And this is an important thing to think about, is who is your Lich? What did they do? What's their story? Like, a Lich just begs to have a really well-defined backstory that you've considered and that you can impart to the characters, maybe as they're exploring the antechambers of its lair, dealing with its other plots and machinations, right? They should know who this is and their story to some extent, learn cool lore about it, which will make it all the more frightening. That's true of the Mage as well, but especially true of a CR21 Lich, right? Should be a big deal. It's not just Lich number 12 that you got at some, Lich Mart. Like this is the Lich that, wove its path to power across eons and you're now facing. So you want to establish that. Similarly, we want to establish some fear in our players, probably even more so than with the Mage. So that DPR, the damage per round, is going to matter so that this feels like the tough fight that you are kind of wanting to deliver. Again, it's going to vary how you calculate, whether you do what the D&D designers do and say that we only get 2 targets in our areas of effect, or if we get more than that based on the size of the area effect. I talked about this in my monster videos. So if you use the right spells and you can get just 2 targets in each, you will deal a DPR, damage per round, of 183. Every round, 183 points of damage. But it's an impressive 310 if you can get more than 2 targets in your AoEs. 310 is far higher than the Ancient Copper or Black Dragons that are the same CR, which is really, really amazing. That's right. This is a strong, potentially very, very dangerous creature if you can get things to be in the favor of the Lich, which tactically the Lich would strive to do, right? It's not going to sit there in its throne room and allow the whole characters to enter through different entrances so they're all spread out. Not how it's going to do it. Especially when it's been using its ability to use clairvoyance on them and watch them approach. No. So what is the path to optimal DPR for the Lich? Well, if it has a bunch of targets, it's going to be Chain Lightning, Fireball, and Lightning, and then its legendary actions. What it's not going to do under just its optimal situations is to multi-attack with its Eldritch Burst or Paralyzing Touch. But those do deserve mention. Let's start with that. So you can see here the Eldritch Burst, plus 12 to attack, which we mentioned is a little low, but it's all right. Reach 5 feet or range 120 feet, so it's got nice options there. 31 force damage. That's just your straight vanilla. And if we do 31, on 3 attacks, that is 93 total force damage, which is nothing to sniff at if you're focusing on one character. That is somewhat reasonable if we compare it to the average DPR, given that it has legendary actions. But just on its own, average DPR that you would like to have is in the 200s for this CR. And we are going to be, dealing 93 in a damage is way, way below that. So if all you're doing is your Eldritch Burst, no good. But wait, here's the key. You can do Eldritch Burst or Paralyzing Touch. If you get your Paralyzing Touch off, that is only 15 cold damage, but the target is paralyzed until the start of the Lich's next turn. So the target will lose out on doing something. They will be incapacitated, so it'll end concentration. That can make it great tactically. And whatever troubling things they're doing will probably come to an end. If they're using magic items on you or having some great aura effect, whatever, that's all gone. What you get to do is you now can crit them with those Eldritch Blasts, or Eldritch Bursts, and that will do 62 damage twice, which takes you to 144 plus the 15 cold before. That's a little better than that 93. This can work really well in isolation, and we'll get back to this in a second. But let's go back to what the optimal path will be. It's not going to be usually using your multi-attack. It'll be your Chain Lightning, which is going to roll 10 dice that will average 4.5, and you can probably get 4 targets in that for 180 damage. It'll be your Fireball, which will, at its level, will deal 10 dice times 3.5 times 4 targets, 140. Your Lightning Bolt probably will get 3 targets, that's 105. So right there, that's 3 rounds of absolute pain if you can get everybody in those AoEs, which we'll talk about. You also have your legendary actions. Disrupt Life is really strong. 31 damage, 4 targets. That's going to be 124 damage. And let's look at what that's describing in its legendary action. So you're going to get 3 legendary actions or 4 in your lair. I didn't actually use the in-layer math for the DPR, so your DPR can actually be higher than what I told you earlier. but assuming it's 3, probably 4, but assuming it's 3, if you use that Disrupt Life, it's a DC 20 con save, and each creature that isn't undead and within a 20-foot emanation originating from the Lich, you will deal 31 necrotic damage to everybody there. Success is half damage, and you can only do this once per round. So you should be able to get 4 people, especially if you're careful about your movement when it is your turn. Position yourself such that you'll get about 4 targets in this and just deal that damage out to everybody. 31 damage, which has a little kicker in between everything else you're doing. That's pretty tasty. Your other options for legendary actions are going to be the Deathly Teleport, which you'll also want to do twice. Again, you can only do Disrupt Life once. Deathly Teleport lets you teleport, which is very important in these kinds of fights against high-level characters. Teleport up to 60 feet to an occupied space you can see. Each creature within 10 feet of the space it left takes 11 necrotic. So this is a nice little damage boost to whatever's messing with you. You can hit them for 11 each. You'll probably get 2 creatures in this and go off to some other spot from where you can unleash devastation. This is especially great as a way to line up those fireballs or lightning bolts or whatever. You can maneuver with that Deathly Teleport off turn. Then when it becomes your turn, drop in that spell that will be really awesome. We'll also talk about isolation in a second, because maybe your Deathly Teleport can be used for that. Your other option is Frightening Gaze. Here, what you do is cast Fear, and the DC is the same, which is nice. So it's your spellcasting DC of 20. That is an interesting option. It's no damage, so I don't include it in my path to DPR. But what is nice about it is that Fear in this version is going to cause your targets to run away. And that is really strong. If you can get even a couple of people to run away from your source of fear, that can be a really strong effect. The downside of Fear is it's only a 30-foot cone. They get a saving throw, but if you can get it on a couple, it's a gamble, but it could really, really, really pay off to have the Lich hit them with a Fear and have several characters go off, which could set up that isolation that we'll talk about in a second. But let's get back to our path of DPR and some of the other options that you have, because this is, again, a complex creature with a lot of options. If this had been the Mage, we'd be done by now, but it's not. So again, your typical path to victory is going to be your path to challenge, because the PCs will win. That's what we want. But it'll be the Chain Lightning for 180 damage, the Fireball for 140, the Lightning Bolt for 105, and then you're hitting them with that legendary action of Disrupt Life once, and twice with your Deathly Teleport, moving around the battlefield. That's your bread and butter approach. Now, some options. That Frightening Gaze is one. If you are willing to take that chance and you can get enough characters in that 30-foot cone, the chance that some of them will run away for a round or two, that could be wonderful, because now you're just dealing with a few threats, and that opens up some interesting concepts, such as Power Word Kill. Power Word Kill is just one target. If they have 100 or fewer hit points, they're down. They're dead. So given that ability of not resurrecting without True Res or Wish, that's a big deal. If you messed up and they have 101 hit points or higher, which has happened to me, then you deal 78 damage. There is no save on this on average, so it is really stronger than something like Finger of Death. Power Word Kill is really strong. The only downside is just like even dealing 100 hit points worth is a lot lower than that Chain Lightning of 180 or the Fireball of 140, but it can get rid of that damaged character that's causing lots of trouble. So we need to keep that in our back pocket. There's that character that's really threatening us. We're dropping them down with that Power Word Kill as an option. Finger of Death is on average 61.5 damage, save for half. So there is a save. It's a single target option. If you can't get multiple targets and you already used your Power Word Kill, or you don't think you should, yeah, this can be an option, right? But it's a lot lower option. In fact, 61.5 average, we can do more damage than that with our Eldritch Burst. So really, you can take Finger of Death off the list. What else do we have? We have a couple of other options that are more tactical. Scrying is interesting. It can work if you want to scry, be able to see what they're doing outside of the lair. Like you could watch them on their adventures leading up to this. Learned more about their weaknesses and methods. This can be fun things like threaten their loved ones because you've been able to scry their town and learn about their backstory, their parents, their partner, their whatever, right? Scrying can be a mechanism that explains a lot of role playing you do in the adventure, which would be cool. Dispel magic can remove problematic effects if you need to do that. It's just rough spending an action on that. You can plane shift twice. So you could do things like plane shift and come back invisible if you really, really want to fight and don't mind losing. If they think you're gone because they see you plane shift out, and you plane shift somewhere else, come back invisible, drop that hammer on them. Almost make it into a 2-stage fight. Brutal. They also have Dimension Door, which gives them the ability to move around the battlefield twice. Dimension Door now works like a teleport, right? It's no longer like the portal you stick half your body through and come out the other side kind of thing. This is a great way to move about to different locations. Animate Dead, that's probably just get it before combat. If you know they're coming, you might as well have already used it. If you want to have some minor things there for them to fight, that can work. One thing that isn't here and used to be in the 2014 version was Cloudkill. Cloudkill was a lot of fun because while it didn't do a ton of damage, 5d8 poison, it heavily obscured and the Lich was immune to the damage. So you could just throw it on around all of these warriors that are beating on you, paladins, whatever. Now they can't see you at all. You're dealing damage to them. You can cast without worrying about them. That was really, really strong. And this could work if you wanted to institute Cloudkill back in. It's kind of worth considering. Because what I see with this Lich is there are kind of two things that make it really, really frightening, right? One is you just drop this AoE, which already takes you way above CR if you can get a bunch of targets. So if this is an area that is only but so big, only gives them so many options to spread out, so you can get 3 and 4 targets consistently, you're dealing a ton of damage, and the rest will kind of run itself if you want to be that simple about it. The other option I see is a situation where the Lich has terrain advantages to isolate characters. If you had things like runes on the ground where as they move around, they get teleported somewhere. Invisible fields that are in certain places, and as the characters move across them, they get moved around. And this location is more of a maze-type location. The Lich could use its various abilities that it has to move around and fight a couple of characters in isolation. And that's where it could do this combination of, for example, powered kill on something it's wounded. Take that person out of the fight. That will scare the pants off of everybody, right? Then it can do something like its combination of its at-will attacks. So let's go back and look at these. If it looks with its multi-attack, if it were to do the paralyzing touch to paralyze someone, and then it does a crit, 2 crits of Eldritch Burst, that is a ton of concentrated damage, and they're still paralyzed until the start of the next turn, at which point the Lich could do it again. No longer paralyzed for that first attack, but if it hits, it can do it again. Or it could use one of its many spells, right? That's where Might Finger Death or something else, right? It has a lot of options at that point if it's fighting you in isolation and did that much damage to you the previous round. The isolation attack also lets it do all kinds of things, like where it could take on just a couple of characters and use an AoE with less perfection, but Fireball and Lightning Bolt are at will. So just even 2 targets in those can be a lot of damage, and then it runs off, right? Or teleports or whatever it does. So you could devise really, really, really brutal encounters if there are teleporters throughout this place and that sort of maze-like feeling. That would be brutal. Liches are high CR. One of the things that's tough when we're trying to create a really thrilling encounter is if we want to add more things to the fight. that makes a lot of sense in terms of narrative and the fun of it. But now we are sort of lowering that CR relative to the characters in terms of the encounter build, right? We have to lower its experience points, add more monsters. That means the characters are higher level than they would have been. I wouldn't probably do that. I think what I would do is just precast Animate Dead, call that being fair because this is a creature that's scrying on you, and let those kind of help bottleneck, kind of like I was describing with the Mage, bottleneck the characters somewhat, help you get your AoE off, but not make them a big threat, and really just work on the tactics of this Lich being able to escape through its various spells being pinned down. Helping it do that are its reactions, before we forget those. It has, very similar to the Mage, protective magic, can cast counterspell or shield. So it has some ability to protect its spells, cancel really, really bad spells that are coming in, possibly, or shield away from a hit that would have hit it, that it can cause a miss on, or if there's some kind of force damage coming in, the magic missiles, then that can really help. Again, keep in mind that I've been talking about 3 legendary actions, and it might have a 4th, which would give it a lot of options there and make it maybe a little better to use that frightening gaze and get that off on them. Overall, this is a really neat monster. This is, I think there've been some nice changes to this Lich. The complexity is still there, but I think if you think through them along the lines of what we're talking about, you see some patterns emerge as to how the Lich would approach things. And you could decide whether you want to create this sort of AoE pit that it's going to be fighting in, or if it's going to be dealing with trying to isolate some characters, or maybe even a combination of both. It's not a bad idea to think about some kind of encounter that would start maybe in its tomb, and it steps through a portal into a maze, and then it ends up in a dais of unholiness that is, again, kind of a little more open, right? So you could do that sort of open maze, open, and it would have advantages in different places that would make it really scary, and the characters maybe have to decide, do you keep following the Lich through each time, or do you stop to like help characters that are downed or hurt and reheal, that kind of thing. Really kind of neat. From a construction standpoint, so that's kind of the tactics. From a construction standpoint, I like in general what's been done here. It is interesting to me still to see all of these spells. We get this multi-attack, Eldritch Burst, and Paralyzing Touch, which is a lot better than looking up at will cantrips. But we have a lot we need to look up here and prepare for, right? You have to figure out what the Fireball level 5 does versus the normal and the level 5 Lightning Bolt. That's not necessarily easy. Thinking through the conditions of the Chain Lightning, a bit of a complicated spell. So I would plan to make notes, have either index cards that have these on there, or you print out this stat block and you're writing on it and around it so you have notes and really know the benefits of these, and think through what you're doing when, right? When would you use Power Word Kill? You might use it when you have the upper hand. So you just do that one single target to show off and take one character down when you could have taken down 4, right? That might be a way that you let players claw back into the battle because this Lich has so much ego that it does so. Do you open with Chain Lightning, or do you wait? Because Chain Lightning actually is a little more flexible on its AoE spacing. So you could actually wait a bit before you drop Chain Lightning and start with Fireball or Lightning Bolt if they're lined up. So there's some options here to think through. And I think that time planning will be well spent, will go well towards creating an awesome challenge for these. So I hope you've enjoyed, as I have, looking at these 2 spellcasting beasts. They can drop serious damage in multi-target form while having some neat options for single target, especially that Lich. I hope this has been useful. Let me know what you think about these tactics videos and what you want me to cover next. Thank you to everybody who is on my Patreon and who's part of our awesome Discord where we talk about things with the Mastering Dungeon folks. Really appreciate everybody who supports us. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.